Are you looking to stay connected with the boys over on Beyond the Unknown? Well, check out Nicotina.net. There you can join the community under Beyond the Unknown and be able to interact with both Daniel and myself and get access to exclusive content only available on the community at www.nicotina.net. Join the community and be a part of the Beyond the Unknown team today. What's up, you guys? Welcome back to Beyond the Unknown. I'm your host, Andre, and today we have a guy who is a director and producer of multiple UFO documentaries and Bigfoot documentaries. He is none other than Darcy Weir. And today we go into so many different topics, such as Bob Lazar, the Virginia case in James Fox's Moment of Contact, and his new film, Transmediums, Fastmovers and USOs, available right now on Amazon Prime. Guys, this is Beyond the Unknown. What's up, guys? Welcome back to Beyond the Unknown. Once again, I'm joined by my co-host and brother, Daniel. What's up, Daniel?
How you doing, man?
I'm doing great. And today we have a very special guest. He is none other than Darcy Weir, director and producer of multiple documentaries about UFOs. And I even found out he's done some Bigfoot documentaries as well, which I was like, I did not know he has done that. So, Darcy, what's going on, man?
Hey, guys. Good to be here. Just, rolling with the punches. Yesterday, my dog was getting violently ill and just taking it day by day. Sorry we had to, reschedule all this stuff.
Oh, no, it's fine. The main thing is that I want to make sure that your dog is okay. I mean, is he getting better? Is he or she getting better?
He.
Yeah.
I feel like even though he almost died, he'll probably try and eat another bar of chocolate. But, it is what it is. He's got the greatest personality that goes along with that stupidity, right? So... It's a blessing and a curse.
It is. Very scary stuff, man. Especially like when your dogs, get sick or whatnot. It's never easy. We feel like it's harder with humans, but with dogs, it's even harder because they can't talk back. So you're like, man, what's going on?
Nah.
There was one time where I came home from work and my dog's ears, they were all swollen. And I was like, what's going on? So I had to rush her to the animal hospital, and they said, oh, it's an allergic reaction. She probably got stung by a bee. I was like, I would have no idea, It's just crazy.
Yeah, and they don't know either. They're just like, oh, something's going on. And puke. And diarrhea.
Oh, my gosh.
Yeah, not good.
They were like, something's wrong. I don't know what it is. But I mean.
The true shit show.
Yeah, the true shit show in the truest form. So what's going on? What's been keeping you guys busy?
Well, we've been doing a lot of episodes lately about Bigfoot. But this show in general, we talk about Bigfoot, we talk about UFOs, we talk about paranormal, talk about a lot of different things. I can see you're getting very excited right now.
I'm glowing.
Like, woo!
My camera just glowed me up. So
yeah, that's very, very cool. But Darcy, you recently came out with a new documentary called Transmedium, Fastmovers and USOs. Can you talk to us a little bit about what was your inspiration for this documentary?
Yeah, the USO phenomenon, which is, to most UFO aficionados, which is pretty much everybody on Twitter or who's been, reading books or going to conferences in the past decade, a USO is a UFO. It's just when it goes into a body of water and it's detected by people on boats or in this documentary we profile like the submarine situation with the Navy. These are considered unidentified submerged objects, and I think it's one of the things that's more underreported. Like, we always think UFO, right? We think unidentified flying objects. These are things that are in the sky. The sky is a gaseous medium of the planet. And we kind of forget what's going on in the ocean. And the ocean covers 71% of the planet's surface. And it's explored, but it's not fully mapped, the ocean seabed, and the ocean volume is not fully mapped and understood either, which is like the different levels of the body of water as you go down to the abyss from the surface. There's lakes that we don't fully understand around the world, like in Russia, you've got Lake Baikal and the Russian swimmer's tale, which is about like these humanoid beings that these Russian Navy divers experienced. And I think there's just a whole domain, which is the ocean, and unidentified submerged object history that's overlooked. And I wanted to take my best first effort at cataloging some of that with the help of Richard Dolan, Chris Stiles, who's a guy who profiled and researched the Shag Harbor incident really well, Canadian ufologist, you'd say. I also got the help of Andy Marciel at the end, he covered the UAP videos that were leaked by DHS, Department of Homeland Security. Anthony Assemblar, who's a friend and runs his own channel called Unidentified S4. And not least, probably one of the greatest gets of the documentary was two-star Rear Admiral Navyman Tim Gallaudet, who served for the Navy for 32 years, and 7 of those years he was actually the chief oceanographer for the Navy, and he witnessed himself a UAP incident when he was on this Navy exercise in 2015, and that was the now famous Go Fast UAP video that was leaked post 2017. But he saw it 2 years earlier, and it was on a secure server within the Navy when they were planning these exercises, and it was a safety of flight risk. And he's starting to become more vocal now, and we need more people like that. I've been covering UFOs, Bitcoin, cryptids, as you mentioned, like Bigfoot and the other Bigfoot-style creatures that have been known around the world throughout history. And, it's just a natural progression to start covering other strange and possibly true aspects of ufology, and that's what led me to USOs.
That's great. It sounds like you had a great supporting cast to kind of get this doc put together. How much time does that kind of take? And do you do a lot of that work at home? Do you go somewhere else to do it? I mean, kind of maybe add a little color to that for us.
Yeah, I mean, each project takes its own amount of time. There's documentaries that I've worked on in the past, like Secret Space UFOs. That was like a whole sort of NASA anomaly and space UFO activity series that I made. And I shot some of the primary footage for that when I was living in Australia when I was 27. And I'm 39 now. So, and then I published probably the first version of that documentary in, I want to say like 2019 or something like that. Mm-hmm. So that it took a while to sort of like put together certain stories, but yeah, I've traveled a lot to make the documentaries that I make. I'm usually flying to somebody's home that I've convinced, I'm worthy of being in their presence, and right. They don't have to like have a gun on their hip while I interview them. Or I go meet them at a mutual space, like at a conference or something like that. That is if the conference hasn't outlawed us to do interviews, which is something I've been experiencing recently. Certain conferences are getting a little ridiculous in terms of their vice grip on content creation. And yeah, I mean, like once I shoot my interviews, I'm usually traveling back home to my own office studio, and I'm starting to edit. I'm starting to get animations made, motion graphics, compile data like old documents that pertain to the testimony of the people that I interviewed, and I work with other editors. I work with other music folks. I work with pretty much all kinds of creatives that can help me.
It's a process, it sounds like.
It's a huge process.
Yeah.
And I am, as some people say, a one-man army.
But I mean, it's very gratifying, though. I mean, I've seen a number of these documentaries, and I think they're fabulous. The Secret Space UFOs, Apollo 1 through 11, I've been meaning to tell you, God, that was so good. The first time I saw that, I was like, I couldn't believe the amount of video footage and audio that you were able to accumulate for each one of those. Because, I mean, if you watch all of the Secret Space UFO, trilogy, I think there's 3 or 4.
5.
If you watch those, like they all sort of connect together because you're getting similar information from the other ones, and so you're like, oh, I see where this connects now. I see why he's presenting this information, again. And some of the transmissions that the astronauts were putting out, I mean, it's very compelling. I was like, there's no way that they weren't seeing stuff that shouldn't have been there.
Yeah, and I mean, sometimes, quite honestly, it might have just been something they didn't understand just yet. Like, we have to factor in and account for the fact that these guys were the very first people to go to this frontier, which is space, and, if you watch NASA's first missions, which is like the second in the series, and it covers the X-15 missions, which are the first space plane missions, kind of like what Virgin Galaxy does now, flies up high and then shoots a plane off the edge of a craft into space. NASA was doing that in 1958. And then we go to the Mercury missions, which were the first space capsules that were launched into space, and then astronauts would do some revolutions around the planet, take pictures of what they saw, maybe some DAC motion picture footage if they could, and they recorded on these black box flight recorders everything that they were saying. So they got all kinds of testimony from that. Then we go to the Gemini missions, which were considered the bridge to the moon. That's where they were going and doing spacewalks outside of the capsules and, really trying to push the limits to get ready to eventually catapult off to the moon and revolve around that, land, and see what they could find there, right? And I think when you watch NASA's first missions, one thing that was pretty interesting was during the Gemini mission, Scott Carpenter, he lost track of his mission goals, his checklist, because all of these astronauts, they were constantly running through, do this, do this, do this, do this, like check, 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 check. And Capcom was keeping on top of them as well, so they didn't lose track of what they had to do and fuck up the whole mission. Right. Sorry for swearing. Or, missed their reentry, which Scott Carpenter did. And, if he had run out of fuel and completely missed his reentry, he would have been a dead astronaut.
He'd still be out there now.
Space.
Just
exactly. He'd be like Laika, the space dog from the Russian space program. But
well,
essentially,
that's a whole story in itself too. I had heard talk about how the Russians were trying to do the same thing, and that there was actually supposedly, okay, so I mean this is just urban legend at this point from what I understand, but they had cosmonauts that they would send into space in their ships or whatnot to orbit the Earth, and that they were not able to actually come back to Earth, and they just essentially just floated away into space, and they were just like, and they would cover it up because they wouldn't want anyone else to know about that.
Yeah, and that was one of the major risks of all the space missions that NASA carried out was, is this the mission where on national television or radio we broadcast the death of one of our American hero pilots, right? Because a lot of them were test pilots that got graduated to becoming astronauts. And the Russians are much more secretive about everything they know in terms of what's going on around the world in space or probably the oceans. And they definitely have had some form of, UFO crash retrieval program, just like the Americans. It's just they're super tight about that data. Freedom of Information Act does not even exist in Russia. And you'd like to think that we live in a democracy, which we do. We do have certain freedoms in the West. In Russia, it pales in comparison. There's no real freedom to information, especially when it comes to military. And both space programs, the American space program and the Russian space program since inception, were inextricably linked to the military. That's why many of these missions, the data was classified for like 10 years. And it's only after that got declassified that you get like these UFO aficionados that were pouring through like mission transcripts from the flight recorders, or looking at photos that came out of, the Apollo Lunar Surface Journal and found anomalies. So, I give thanks to a lot of those types of folks that were really vigilant in the West that uncovered a lot of this stuff. And it was actually those folks that usually found a lot of stuff that came out of the USSR.
Do you get a lot of pushback from people that you reach out to interview for, different types of docs that you're working on? Is it tough to get people to talk?
Yes and no. Like, there are some folks that have seen my previous work and they go, okay, yeah, like, I appreciate what you do. Let's talk about it. Let's set up some time to discuss further. But then there's like, for example, today I was reaching out to a pretty high up there influencer in the UFO community, somebody, let's say, that's been a journalist for a long time. And they said they basically had a Netflix deal that they signed in 2023, and they can't interview with anybody else till that project is complete.
Wow.
And I'm just like, yeah. So, I mean, that's the breaks, but you just move on and try and tell your story with people that, want to give you a little bit of time and give a bit more color to illustrate the story you're trying to tell.
Yeah, and I think that's really beneficial, because for folks like myself who have never actually seen anything in the air or in the sky, or let alone the ocean, being able to see how it's brought forth on streaming services, it helps put that vision. And I've repeated that just numerous times with different interviews that we've had, especially with like the Bigfoot realm of things. You don't know how it looks like until you talk to someone that says they've seen it, and they explain it in detail, which really helps someone like myself really kind of conceptualize what it is that they're looking at, and that's great that you're able to do that. It just helps. It helps the viewers, and that's great, man. I just tip my hat to that. So I appreciate that.
Thank you, brother. I mean, like with the Bigfoot stories that I put together, they were actually, I made my first UFO documentary with a friend, Lee Lustig, who's out of LA. He edits for like Netflix docs, and he's done like Chef's Table and all kinds of stuff like that. Great guy, good friend of mine. And then I moved on to do like 2 Sasquatch docs, The Unwanted Sasquatch and Sasquatch Among Wild Men. And, you know, I'm fascinated by that whole phenomenon because
Yeah.
it's just people are taking photos, videos of it still today.
Yeah.
And I was going to name my first documentary The Last Sasquatch. That was called The Unwanted Later Sasquatch. But I was going to call it The Last Sasquatch. And then I found out some dickheads made a bad found footage horror movie. And they kind of stole my film title. But I wanted to call it The Last Sasquatch because I wasn't quite sure if like, you know, they were around still because
Yeah.
you see the Patterson Gimlin footage, which is like groundbreaking. You know, it's
Right.
everything you want to see in a cryptid film, right? And I had to like contact the Gimlin family to license that famous footage and stuff.
Oh wow.
They formed like an empire off of that story, right?
Oh, I'm sure.
And then the other films that I saw that were like similar in quality, you know, were very few and far between. And so I wasn't quite sure if they were still around. I thought maybe like we might have caught the last, you know, representatives of their species maybe in the past 30 years. And maybe a lot of the videos we've seen since like the late 90s to now could have just been like copycats trying to make new found footage, like new Sasquatch or Bigfoot footage.
Yeah.
But, you know, by the time I made Sasquatch Among Wild Men, I realized like, wait a second, like if this is this like scarce population of cryptids that could exist in deep wilderness still today, they might have existed all around the world at one point, you know, like in places like Mongolia, where you've got China and the Shenanjia National Rainforest. They call their Bigfoot the Yeren. You know, the footprints match almost identically. They've got the hair samples and weird nest structures in their forests that guys have found in the Olympic National Park outside of Seattle, you know? And like, then you've got the Almasty in Russia and the Yeti. People think the Yeti is only just the Himalayas, but the Russians have been calling their tall, wild man creature a Yeti for hundreds of years. And then you've got like, I'm probably forgetting all kinds of others, but you've got like in Indonesia, the orang pendek, which is like this short Sasquatch being, like the Hobbit thing, and they keep finding remnants of these things. So it's like maybe these things still exist in small numbers in deep wilderness, and every now and then, as we're like encroaching and spreading as a species ourselves, we cross their path, they cross ours, and you know, they go their way and we get freaked out and go our way.
Yeah, it's basically
right?
Yeah, you know, we've talked to a lot of folks about Bigfoot, and you know, I think there's an interesting difference between, you know, Bigfoot and the UFOs or USOs. You know, I think the biggest difference that I believe in is that Bigfoot is, you know, from Earth essentially. You know, he is flesh and blood. That's what I believe in. where the UFO phenomenon, that is something that is outside of Earth, right? Where they've traveled here essentially, and and they've had to travel here, and depending on who you listen to, sometimes they'll say that they've been here, this whole time, But I tend to gravitate more towards the flesh and blood piece of these things, because it's easier for me to touch essentially, right? Can you kind of give us a little bit more information on the USOs, the UFOs, and kind of what have you learned from all these interviews that you've had and making of all these films?
Sure. So I think, just based off your description that like Bigfoot is terrestrial, probably, um, which I 100% agree with. Like,
Yeah.
I'm not part of the camp that they're like portal jumping dimension monsters or something like that.
Yeah, no. It's
I think that's folks that are just trying to create a new genre or something within a genre. And I mean, there's going to be somebody that watches your interview. They'll leave a comment like, blasphemy! How dare you insult portal jumping, UFO riding Bigfoot,
yeah.
right?
I mean, it's a
This,
species. If it
this,
exists, it's a species.
yeah, in my opinion. And they think I'm evil. But basically, uh, what I've been learning about sort of the UFO phenomenon throughout the past decade or so is that there's got to be like a terrestrial version of the UFO phenomenon. I think not only is there some kind of reverse engineered vehicle that we've mastered using now, and we're constantly throwing off the scent of our adversaries by saying it's alien technology or something. It's almost like that counterintelligence move
Right.
to prevent Russia or China from knowing what we have in our arsenal. So I think there's evidence for that sort of terrestrial UFO stuff. And I made a documentary called Rise of the TR-3B, which is part of the Secret Space UFOs series, just kind of like documenting what if, Ames National Laboratory and the Department of Energy and NASA and Lockheed Martin and Northrop Grumman were all actually colluding behind the scenes to create super black budget project space planes that could, far exceed anything our liquid rocket program with, Apollo mission and STS space shuttle mission technology could ever provide. And that was just like a cover for the public. So everybody thought we were just using fossil fuels only in terms of technology. But really, we had this whole ace, full house of technology we had hidden and suppressed from the rest of the world in the military sort of environment. But I also think that it's possible, if you listen to people like David Grush and these other whistleblowers that are going to be coming forward more and more, that there's a non-human intelligence that might have a dominance in our oceans. And, it kind of harkens back to the idea of James Cameron's The Abyss.
Are you looking to jumpstart your small business? Then check out PowerBrandSystems. They offer one platform that centralizes all of your social media interactions and pulls together all your reviews from either Facebook or Google. They even have plans in which they will handle all of your social media interactions to help boost your small business into the future. Guys, if you're looking to propel your small business, please check out PowerBrandSystems. Use the referral code in the description below when making your first purchase of PowerBrandSystems. And on top of that, use promo code 300POWER to save up to $300 on your first purchase of PowerBrandSystems. Propel your small business today.
That, there's a whole human Navy program and stuff going on in the oceans and a research program, and then all of a sudden we stumble across these non-human intelligence that have great technology that reside at the bottom of the ocean that we had no idea, like I think based on the USO activity and the UFOs over our oceans, and many of the accounts that these things are emanating from our oceans, that we can't discount the idea that something might actually have a stronghold down there that we haven't fully accounted for yet in the mainstream public knowledge of this. So I think there might be a non-human intelligence terrestrial element to UFOs and USOs, and then I think there could be an extraterrestrial. In science, we're looking for extraterrestrials with like the SETI Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence program and NASA's multiple programs, and the European Space Agency has their own version of SETI. If we're looking for that out in the universe, and our sun is just a grain of sand in this ocean of possibilities, there must be stuff that's coming from other stars eventually if its technology is superior to ours and they've been able to make that technological leap to allow them to do that. I think it's possible.
I think it's definitely possible, but at the same time, when we talk about, if another species, an extraterrestrial species, would have found this planet, thousands of years ago, let's just say, whenever they did, the most obvious place is to say, okay, so we want to study them. You would set up bases on the moon and in the oceans because it's the easiest place to set up where we can't get to. Watching your space documentaries, it really, for me, it was compelling enough to say something was there. I believe something was on the moon already. And if that was the case, if that is true, then I feel like they're also in our oceans as well. But the idea that, there's a separate terrestrial species living in our oceans that have access, that have technology, that are there's a civilization down there. That would be mind-boggling if that were to be true, knowing that, another species exists, because we've heard all these, folklore about, a species that lives in the center of the earth, a species, that's different from us. What if all that does connect to a species that's been living in the ocean, at the bottom of the ocean for all this time? Now, obviously, they would have a much different look because you're living in essentially darkness unless they can self-illuminate. So overall, their entire look would be completely different from what we know as normal, as as humans, Homo sapiens. But the craft in which we see, or that people have witnessed, it does remind me of ocean life in the sense that they're almost like a jellyfish looking, or circular looking, but self-illuminating. And there's been rumor and talk about how it's a possibility that these craft could actually be more like living organisms that are being controlled by these other beings. So if that were the case, if they were living down there, that would be remarkable. But Darcy, let me ask you. I mean, do you think that that we could be dealing with a separate species that lives in the ocean, or do you think that there's a higher possibility that it's extraterrestrial that is possibly stationed on the moon and in the ocean?
I'm open to both being true, to be honest. Like, especially with all the research I was doing on anomalies on the moon, structures that are being found throughout the Apollo moon missions, and before that, the lunar orbiters. You've got the Project Clementine, which was some satellites we threw around there and got some really higher definition stuff in the 90s. And interestingly enough, like, some of those photos were so photoshopped, like they literally didn't even take the time to properly airbrush and smooth over certain photos that they had published online, but didn't want you to see what was on the lunar surface. So you see a structure with a big blur over it, And it's like, why would they blur just that structured area, right?
Exactly.
I think like when you talk about the moon, um, and it doesn't have, it has a very slight atmosphere, it has very slight gravity, um, it has water, but it's ice.
Mm-hmm.
I almost feel like, and it's bombed out by craters, right? There's no doubt about that. Like it's not protected like the Earth is with our atmosphere that can erode meteors and asteroids and stuff if they shoot through. But I feel almost like the moon could have been a place that harbored some kind of intelligent civilization. And I feel like the stuff that is anomalous, those structures and such, might be almost like it might be one or two of two things. Either there is some kind of non-human intelligence that still exists there that's just keeping it really out of sight, out of sound, and they're doing their thing. Or I almost feel like there's an autonomous like aspect to what's going on up there, like almost like a derelict ancient space station that has technology still running,
Mm-hmm.
but the masters of that have moved on, you know? And for our oceans, I don't know. Like, what if some of these tic tacs and stuff like that are also autonomous and they come from some kind of like ancient artificial intelligent program that's been running around our planet and monitoring and still running these like I guess maintenance features and stuff. I don't know, but
Mm-hmm.
scientifically, like things like a von Neumann probe that are like these self-replicating technological craft and stuff like that are sent into space to explore and report back information from a greater distance. There's something that we're probably going to work on eventually. It's like, the ultimate drone technology.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of this UFO stuff could be drones from another civilization, and maybe there aren't. Maybe I mean, if you listen to what Dr. Gary Nolan has been saying, who's like a protege of Jacques Vallée, and Jacques Vallée has been like studying this stuff since he was part of the United Nations and such. Um, they theorize that a lot of these like supposed gray encounters, like these
Mm-hmm.
non-human looking, black-eyed, short, uh, like skinny beings that have been seen on crafts by abductees or experiencers, they might even be just like a puppet. They might even be some form of AI or an avatar for a higher intelligence that's trying to interact with us, right? And we're just stuck in this like 3D realm. Our brains are not quite evolved enough. Our vision and other senses are not like at this point that we can understand 4 or 5 dimensional realities. So these little sort of like puppet beings are placed in front of us. And those things are so technologically futuristic and superior that they're able to like telepathically beam communication right into our brains and stuff like that, as some
Mm-hmm.
experiencers have mentioned throughout this whole UFO phenomenon thing.
Right.
So I'm open to it, to all
Yeah.
kinds of aspects that could exist in scientific reality eventually.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, even your interview with Tim Gallaudet. I mean, he had talked about, the presence of something moving in the water at fast speeds. There was another guy you talked to. What was his name? D'Antonio, who
Mark
was
D'Antonio, yeah.
Mark D'Antonio, who was in the submarine when they experienced something moving at a fast rate of speed in the ocean. And it wasn't as if they said, okay, battle stations, everybody, this is it. We don't know what it is. No, they just seemed kind of like, oh, yeah, there's that. And
Yeah.
it's incredible. Something is moving down there at a high rate of speed that we cannot mimic or we cannot replicate that we know of.
Yeah, I think like the two sort of things I mentioned with him is supercavitation, which is, or he mentioned it to me, is like the torpedo technology in which the torpedo creates an envelope of steam or air in front of the tip of it so that it can just cut through water. Because like ocean water or any water is uncompressible. You cannot compress it. That's why when a plane goes down and crashes into the water, it usually smashes depending on how it lands because the water becomes like a solid when it's trying to be compressed. And, with these objects, they're shooting through the ocean beyond the speeds of what we know a supercavitating torpedo to even be able to do. A supercavitating torpedo can go about like 170, maybe 150 knots, I think. And these objects are being detected by sonar operators in submarines, possibly in like aircraft carriers and stuff with their own sonar systems, going in excess of like 600 knots, 300 knots. And this is just beyond, our earthly technology that's known, right? You're basically witnessing an object that is negating any friction or forces that the ocean would cause around it. And that's also what we see in the atmosphere too, when these objects are being reported by pilots like Ryan Graves, David Fravor, and many commercial pilots throughout the decades that have reported these things. They seem to just skip through the atmosphere as if it's like teleporting, right? And actually, Mark D'Antonio talks about his theory of the Kaluza-Klein particle and gravitons.
Yes. Thank you.
Like, we're getting to a point in our own mainstream science where we're starting to test our own ability to try and manipulate gravity with this Kaluza-Klein particle theory that was invented actually many years ago, but with these like like the CERN, what is that? It's a particle, what do you call it? Rotating super particle.
Whatever
Help
it
me.
is.
Whatever it is.
Yeah,
Yes.
that one.
that one. Yes.
thing.
Yes, that. Let's talk about that.
So that is looking for the other, elements of this graviton theory. And they're trying to do tests like that in Chile with their own particle reactor down there, which is kind of like CERN. And if we figure that out, there's no saying that from now until 100 years from now, we might not, we might be able to mimic what these UFOs are doing in our like commercial flight endeavors, right? Like maybe at that point this stuff opens up and it's like, okay, we got to go like see grandma on Mars, jump through the portal. You know what I mean? And like we were just talking about like, I guess the non-human intelligence telepathy thing that has been reported by experiencers and abductees and stuff throughout the decades. We're messing around with Elon Musk's Neuralink, and there's companies that are creating these like bands that go around the head, and a lot like Google Glass, where you can like use your eyes and look around a screen, and you're basically making decisions with your eyes. There might be a technology in the future where our thoughts are being read right from our brain from some kind of device that's sitting over top of our head, and that thought is sent like a text message to somebody else wearing that headband across the other side of the planet, right?
Right.
Who's to say that like these little avatar things that we call grays or something don't have that technology so far advanced it's built into their massive cranium, and they're beaming thoughts right into our brains because they just have the
That's what they do.
technology. That's
Yeah.
what they do, right?
They're like, why
Yeah.
wouldn't we do it that way? Yeah, it's like they've evolved to that point. And I mean, when you look at the series of events that have taken place throughout time, and one of them not too long ago, by I think a guy James Fox, the story in Virginia. I think that is one of the most compelling cases I've ever heard in my life. A case in which they ran into these extraterrestrials, these beings, and it wasn't just just the three girls. It was numerous people had encounters with these beings, and they all said how they smelled like sulfur.
Sulfur, yeah.
And so when you think about that, right, where does for human beings, where does sulfur come? It comes from the ocean. It comes from deep underground. And so the talk about, throughout time with religion, talking about demons and creatures coming from the underworld, if they were to see these beings and smell that sulfuric smell, they would automatically think, oh, this is from underground. This is from down below. This is from, deep down. And so it would kind of lend credence to why they would be regarded as, let's say, angelic beings or demons. But the fact that they are what appears to be a sulfuric heavy type of species, perhaps they do live deep down in the ocean where there's an abundance of that they can essentially, that's what their environment is sort of made of.
Mhm.
But what was your take on the Virginia case? I mean, that to me blew my mind. I mean, that left me just speechless after I saw Moment of Contact.
Yeah, I mean, I had followed that story before Moment of Contact. In fact, there was like a sci-fi channel documentary made in the 90s that featured Stanton Friedman and AJ Rivard, who's a Brazilian UFO investigator who's no longer with us. Both of them have passed away. Um, and what was interesting about Stanton's assessment of that crash incident is that he thought that the beings did not resemble higher intelligence like Greys or some of these other non-human intelligence people have reported seeing around the planet. The reason why he said that is because they didn't seem to be wearing any clothes. They didn't seem to have any technology. And the way that the craft was broken open when it was found around that field,
Yeah.
I think if you watch Moment of Contact, that gentleman that originally in the archival footage, he was wearing almost like a trucker's hat.
Yeah.
When he first reported to Brazilian news back when he was younger, and he witnessed them trying to clean up the the crash site. If you listen to what he said, there was like this acidic substance that almost looked like it was splashed all across that grassy landscape where the craft had crashed far outside of town in the countryside. And that substance smelled pungent, just like the beings did. Just like you're saying, it's almost like their environment, the native environment that they're used to, was like just a completely different, I guess, chemical makeup from ours. And the way that Stanton assessed that was that like it almost seemed like it was a containment ship that crashed and these creatures got out, and they were almost like you know, maybe some other higher intelligence's cargo. That's what Stanton
Oh, I see what you're saying.
deduced. Yeah, you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
like if we had a ship full of cattle and they crashed, and then the cattle just start roaming the countryside, and
Yeah.
you know, that type of thing. But obviously, they were higher intelligence than that. They were humanoid. They had red eyes, which no one's ever reported before in this
that's
sort of
true.
history. They had slimy skin like a frog. And that's essentially what was partly responsible for creating this pungent smell. And if you look just in our terrestrial, you know, I guess biology, for lack of a better word, you can see all kinds of organisms that exist on Earth that release pungent smells. And usually it's a self-defense mechanism, and that smell to our brain is alerting us that these are dangerous. Like, do not touch, do not eat. You know, if it smells like that, it usually means no go, right?
Yeah.
And in the animal kingdom, in the ocean, there's certain fish that have like crazy colors, and that usually means poisonous, right?
Frogs as well. Frogs.
Frogs. So I like, I wouldn't, I would allude like those creatures to being not from our planet, right? I would think that I kind of go with Stanton Friedman's assessment that they were actually this like not super intelligent, but more of like a extraterrestrial cargo species that had gotten out and caused trouble for the people of Virginia. And that smell to me just means poisonous, you know, super extraterrestrial. Don't touch. And we know that you know, based off of the that army police officer that was tasked with capturing one of them,
Marco Shirizi.
yeah, he proved this to be true, that that slime got on his skin. His immune system became so overloaded and overwhelmed that he became deathly ill and died within a week. And it's tragic, but you know, the same thing goes if you touch certain types of poisonous frogs in the Amazon rainforest. So to me, that's what they were. I don't, when you know, maybe James Fox will get mad at me for saying this, but like when those three girls came across the one squatting beside this cement wall, yeah, that guy, there's a certain type of universal body language, right? If you saw me crouching by a wall and looking at you like this, that body language is not psychic. It's not a telepathic communication.
Right.
It's a physical communication that I don't feel safe. I don't. Maybe I'm scared, and I'm sick. You know, like all kinds of negative emotions come from that. And when these girls looked at its eyes, they probably were just like overwhelmed by the sense that this thing was suffering. And so they translated that to being like some kind of psychic communication. I don't think that was like a real telepathic moment of contact. I think they just used their imagination and extrapolated from that physical response that they saw it giving off that no bueno, you know?
I thought you had a really good point there, Darcy, and that's the first time I've heard anyone tie those two together, where we're tying together a reaction to an environment to an extraterrestrial species that is essentially doing something that a creature from Earth would do, right? So there's some commonality there that is quote unquote universal. That maybe it is, there is some credence to that, and that's interesting because I've never actually tried to tie those two together before. So I appreciate that. That is very different, and it does kind of bring it back to earth for me a little bit when you say it like that. There's the earth, according to cosmology, was the Big Bang theory, like 13.5 billion years ago or something like that. And it's taken it's taken the human species this long to get to where we're at, right? There's the monkeys and us evoluting to where we're at.
Evolution. Yeah.
Evolution, yeah. But it's interesting that if there is a species out there, they've been able to accelerate that growth far beyond what we've been able to do, right? So if you're just looking at time itself, it's taking us this long to get to where we're at, and they've been able to get way beyond where we're at in roughly the same amount of time. And that's granted that we believe that there's only one Big Bang. There could have been multiple Big Bangs that kind of do these things with other
String theory.
yeah. So there's a lot of that kind of stuff going on, which I find really interesting. Just kind of talking about that, like how it's taking us so long to get to this point. And I think our technology has grown significantly over the past 80 years, right? It's really skyrocketed. And what has allowed us to open our mind that much bigger than it was back in the old Western days? We're riding on a horse, now we're flying, jets and going into space. I mean, what's your thoughts on that, Darcy?
Well, yeah, we have advanced technologically, consciously, in leaps and bounds since, let's say, the 1940s.
Yeah.
We've come a long way, and we're still going to keep going. And I think where we are right now, in terms of artificial intelligence stepping in, this is where things are going to get freaky, because think about all of these STEM sciences that we've been almost using computers that are akin to like an abacus, right? We're doing very rudimentary advances in terms of technology in the public space. Then you have artificial intelligence enter the fray. And a scientist who's been trying to make a breakthrough in aviation technology or communication technology or energy technology. Like, we have the fusion reactor, that the first fission reactor, I think, in the UK that was announced last year, right? And that's supposed to be like harnessing the power of the sun. So what's going to stop scientists that are looking at that problem, which is generating that sort of like sun in a bottle environment and harnessing and capturing that energy, but getting around the problem by speaking to AI and saying, here's the problem, please help me solve it. Hopefully it doesn't hallucinate, but as artificial intelligence becomes stronger and stronger, look at like genetics, right? Like, people don't talk about the genetic testing and genetic manipulation that we've been doing. And the whole COVID outbreak led to the mass rollout of gene CRISPR technology. Like, anybody who got the vaccine that was from Moderna or Pfizer, these were gene CRISPR technology. They were RNA injections that
Mm-hmm.
changed our genetics. Like it wasn't just a mute virus that was injected that our body killed and then was like, oh, okay, now the immune response should be like this next time because we know this virus. No, it was like we injected RNA that went into our genetics, changed our DNA so that we had a completely different system to react quicker to this virus in the future. And when you get artificial intelligence starting to play with gene CRISPR technology and gene modification technology, how do you know that we won't be having our own automaton gray entities in like the next 200 years carrying out duties for us, and they're just like these lab created,
Right.
you know, like subspecies that we had artificial intelligence aid in creating.
Yeah.
Um, and then you've got like space travel. People want to like start colonizing other planets. Artificial intelligence is only going to help in that. Um,
Absolutely.
you know, we're getting there. So I think
Yeah.
in our lifetime we're going to see crazy breakthroughs in this type of stuff, and it's going to start giving us answers to sort of the UFO question that has been plaguing society, or at least the curious people we are, for the past 7 decades, right?
Are you looking to jumpstart your small business? Then check out PowerBrandSystems. They offer one platform that centralizes all of your social media interactions and pulls together all your reviews from either Facebook or Google. They even have plans in which they will handle all of your social media interactions to help boost your small business into the future. Guys, if you're looking to propel your small business, please check out Power Brand Systems. Use the referral code in the description below when making your first purchase of Power Brand Systems. And on top of that, use promo code 300POWER to save up to $300 on your first purchase of Power Brand Systems. Propel your small business today.
Yeah. I mean, even right now, the U.S. military announced that they had a fighter jet with a U.S. pilot in the jet doing a dogfight against another U.S. piloted fighter jet. And the AI was running that ship. And that just came out. I think I read that maybe less than a month ago. And I guess this is the second time they've actually announced it or tested it. And when the pilot landed, he came out and said, "I believe in AI," because of what the AI was able to push this jet to. And he said multiple occasions, it was just cruising at Mach 5. I'm sorry, pulling 5 Gs like nothing. So
Well, there's no pilot inside of it to be like,
well,
oh,
yeah. I mean, there's no pilot,
it's just doing it like
trying to
whatever.
push the blood, back into its head. So it's kind of it is a little bit scary to know that AI can actually pilot these things to a point where humans like, yeah, they can freaking do that. They might be able to be better than us.
Well,
So
even
it is
Chris
kind of
Mellon,
scary.
Chris Mellon, he had said not too long ago, I think he was on with Joe Rogan, and he said kind of like a hypothetical. He said, imagine if these craft come from, a long distance, and then when they get here, they can essentially create an artificial intelligence life form, which would be these gray aliens. He's like, I'm just saying, that would be something that to think about. And when you think about that aspect, that let's say these craft are coming from a different planet, different a distance, it would only make sense as opposed to cryo sleep. It would be to create the artificial intelligent individuals when you get to your destination, and then they can pilot and do what they have to do. And that part right there is scary because, yeah, just like you were saying earlier, Darcy, it's like eventually if we are able to do that, then they're going to be sending them to different planets, Mars, to wherever to explore and do their own research. And who's to say that they aren't yet? Who knows?
Yeah,
But
in a way, you can kind of look at satellites and other type of you know craft like that we're sending out, and then we're getting back messages or like pictures and readings of different planets. That's essentially the same thing, right? But in a much more, I guess, simpler version, if you want to say.
well, the crazy thing was like the whole Shag Harbor incident. So, you know, I had did a video on that. I know I've done extensive research on that, and in this film, this one right here, let me get my cursor, Transmedium, Fast Movers and USOs, which you can find on Amazon right now. It's a fantastic documentary, by the way. Uh, you talked about that case, and the aspect that I did not know was when the divers went down there, how they essentially found the ship and they had beings that were outside the ship working on fixing the ship in the water. I had not heard that before, and that blew my mind. I thought, oh my God. And from what you explained, they saw these things and they were like, what the hell? And then they left. They're like, let's get out of here. Can you
Yeah.
talk to us a little bit about Shag Harbor? Because that's like the Canadian Roswell.
Yeah. So Chris Stiles, who studied that case for 2 decades, he wrote the book about the Shag Harbor, Canadian Roswell, or whatever. Um, he also did investigation to another NATO Navy operation that happened very similarly. Two crash craft, or at least one UFO that crashed in an area called Shelburne, um, which is off the coast of Nova Scotia as well. That's the eastern coast of Canada.
Mm-hmm.
And in both cases, believe it or not, 1960 was Shelburne and Shag Harbor was 1967. The divers that were part of that crew supposedly were sent down to intercept what they thought was maybe a civilian crash craft, and they were expecting to, recover dead bodies of humans or try to see what the craft was and so on. And when they went down there, they saw non-human intelligence. They saw something that looked unearthly. They saw something that didn't look like a human uh, moving around in the ocean outside of the craft. And in fact, I think it was the Shag Harbor incident, they described as they were traveling down towards the object that was sitting on the sea floor there, like a sandbar, let's say, um, they could see what almost was like an arc welder going off in the water, like flashes of almost like lightning. So they were getting startled by that because they had never seen that kind of phenomenon in the water. And as they got closer, they saw these beings essentially trying to repair the hull of the craft, of like maybe a saucer shaped craft. Um, yeah, in the documentary, we kind of like illustrated that with some animation.
Yeah, that was really cool, by the way.
Um, but, it's completely possible, right? Like, what if um, these sort of automatons or like these android type beings that are piloting the craft are not affected by an oxygen in the atmosphere or a lack of it in the ocean? Like, they don't need to breathe per se. They're just like, maybe their bio um, chemical process, which is like, our biochemical process is we have to eat in order to generate energy. We have to sleep in order to repair. We have to, exercise in order to build up our strength and become stronger with our immune system. What if these things don't even need to do, eat and sleep and breathe? Like, they might just have a completely different biochemical process that's going on in their body. But, if you listen to, if you read like The Day After Roswell by Colonel J, is it Corso? Um, he writes that, the beings that they did an autopsy there had lungs,
Hmm.
and they seemed to have like double the capacity of humans, and their blood was like almost like this white substance or something. And um, so they had some kind of like process that their biochemistry was used to that was similar to ours, I guess. But
Yeah.
yeah,
It's interesting when I just kind of want to go back to the idea that that these UFOs can mind speak, essentially, right? And we kind of talked a little about that. And you know, there's theories that there's untapped, or maybe powers that humans actually have, like you and I and Andre, where we just don't know how to tap into it yet. Where this is maybe something that we all have the ability to do. Some people can, and most cannot. Where we can actually, read things and speak to each other in ways that we're not used to. We just know about verbal. I believe that there is some lost technology that we've lost through the times, to where we're at now, where, if you take a step back to the Bigfoot world, where you're actually seeing this creature out there that is one with the earth, essentially. And when you do see it, it's actually, you're just really lucky to get a hold of one and see one, because we don't have the mindset in place to be able to actually be ready to see one all the time, because it's just a different environment, and it just arcs back to the Native Americans that were here, where they were more in tune. They had no technology, nothing like that, and they were more in tune with what was naturally around them. And you can kind of take a look at the pyramid structures in Egypt, the pyramid structures in South America, Central America, and kind of tie some of those things together, where there's some natural things that we do as humans, and some of those things we don't know how to do anymore. And perhaps these extraterrestrials understand that, and they speak to us in a way that we just don't know how to do yet.
yeah. What you're sort of speaking to, the point that you're making to me is like extrasensory perception, right?
Mhm.
Which, in other words, could be explained by remote viewing
Remote viewing,
or
yep.
telepathy or
Psychics.
telekinesis, psychic ability. Remote viewing is a type of psychic ability, but then you've got people that supposedly can do out of body experiences, and they can astral project in dreamscapes and stuff like that. And um, I believe that there's a very strong case that extrasensory perception and remote viewing psychic abilities are something that are innate to humans. And like you said, certain human beings have a elevated sense of it, ability, in other words, and some just completely lack any ability of it, right?
Hmm.
And that mind speak might be a power that the powers that be don't want us to tap into.
Right.
It might be a lost um, technology or ability for
Hmm.
a good reason, because they want us to be stupid. They don't want us to understand our full potential. They
Right.
want us to be glued to our computer, cell phone screens, and be programmable and dumbed down and watching
Well, yeah,
sports and all this type of they
that
want us to be
and
distracted from our
right,
truer potential.
right.
And you've got the Stargate program, which happened within the DIA, Defense Intelligence, and the CIA, Central Intelligence Agency. They both had their turn in testing out ESP over 2 decades. And there's a lot of people that have studied that and believe that they just took that underground and they
Mm.
kept kept their true findings and kept their knowledge on that from the public. We know that the Russians also experimented in that too, to try and compete with the Americans, right? So, I mean, I'm with you. It's very possible that this stuff exists.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's crazy too when you think about, just recently they had the congressional hearings with David Grush and Commander Favor and what was the last guy's name? Ryan Graves. And to me, that was huge. I watched it live. I thought, man, this is incredible. And then similar to what you were saying on the Julian Dory podcast, it's almost like the next day it was like, hey, did you watch UFC? Oh yeah, I did. It just people just sort of moved on, and so it's almost to the point where was that a major breakthrough and a huge step forward in terms of disclosure? Yes, I think it was, but I think that the general population is so programmed to move on from one thing to the next that it doesn't really set in. It doesn't seem real. It doesn't seem, like it's anything substantial. And, some people said, oh, well, every time they would ask him a question, Grush would say, I can't answer that unless we're in a skiff. And so, and people say, oh, well, I've heard people say, oh, well, I believe he's lying because he would have just said it if he wanted to say it. But he's protecting himself.
Yep. If he does have information that is top secret, classified, if he reveals that to the public in an uncontrolled way, just blurting it out, he's not only jeopardizing his own safety by, being stripped of his rights and thrown in jail for breaking his oath, but he's also jeopardizing the supposed national security of the United States, right? Because the reason why you usually classify stuff is because of national security reasons, stuff that you want to keep hidden from your adversaries. You want to hide the best information for your own strategic use. And so he's aware of that. And the public consciousness, the public acceptance is always based on what is being played in mass media, what's being presented in the news, what's being discussed at the dinner table, and what you're learning in a school, an academic environment. And I think all of those social mechanisms, like those foundations of our knowledge and what's publicly acceptable, allow for this subject to not to be taken seriously. And that's why you've got, Salt Foundation and UAP Caucus and, Project Galileo and all of these different sort of new budding avenues for this phenomenon to be taken seriously because they're coming from a scientific and more controlled, better vetted perspective to be rolled out to the public.
Mm-hmm.
I think that there's people that realize that this is not being taken seriously because it's not being taught in schools, it's not being discussed properly in politics, it's not being mentioned in mass media properly. It still has the X-Files theme music played as an intro before a segment on Good Morning America or something.
Right.
Whereas, if you have somebody like Harvard professor Avi Loeb sitting on Good Morning America talking about the idea that non-human intelligence is sending space probes into our solar system, or relic technology from an ancient advanced civilization is being presented to the masses, that's trying to break that, paradigm that this is all just woo and shouldn't be taken seriously. And I'm excited to see how that develops. I hope that some of my work can be eventually accepted by other people in history. Not all of it is just considered, um, for lack of a better word, paranormal or
Hmm.
um, uh,
The woo,
the woo.
it's
Yeah.
like you had mentioned yourself that like yeah, when I get around family, they're like, oh, what do you do? You're like, oh, I make documentaries about what kind? You're like, UFOs, and then immediately it's kind of like, oh, like though, oh, okay, and instead of being like, oh, really, tell me more, I want to know more about this. And that's kind of where we want civilization to go towards, is that when these topics get brought up, it's like, oh, talk to me about that, I want to know more about that, as opposed to trying to disregard it, and disregard it to almost protect their own narrative of what is real in this world. And so that becomes one of the cruxes of, like, why is this kept a secret? Why is extraterrestrial life kept a secret? And so the idea that if it were to be brought to light, that it would destroy people's uh you know fabric of what they believe is reality. Especially those that are heavily religious. If you were to tell them that there is no heaven or hell, what we learn from them is that when you die, and that's the end of it. That would rock our civilization, and maybe that's the reason why the government's like, hey, we can't let this get out, because it would shake up everything.
Yeah.
Now, and that's if it's true.
Yeah,
You
that's
know.
in a lot of ways, society has been going into a direction that is away from faith, right? Where where just don't worry about it and just focus on other things, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which I think could be another narrative that the Rockefellers or whoever's doing this
The powers that
is
be.
the powers that be are making it happen. So I think there's some credence to that as well. Kind of back to the spacecrafts, the crafts that you're hearing about, Darcy. Either coming out of the ocean or flying through our airspace. I think everyone's heard of Bob Lazar. People that listen to this, these topics should know of who Bob Lazar is.
Oh yeah.
And he's done a lot of interviews over the years, and he stopped for a long time, but he had a really good one with Joe Rogan, where he really went into a lot of detail to talk about that. What's your thought on Bob Lazar and what he brings to the table, or what he brought to the table?
Yeah, I think he's another interesting figure that has brought forth, a different slice of disclosure that's been needed in history. So, um, he first came out in like the late 80s, and he spoke right through to the early 90s. And his big reveal was, we've got crash craft that's non-terrestrial, and we're trying to reverse engineer it. And we know that we're not alone in the universe, but we're keeping that all from the public. Um, I totally think his contribution was extremely valuable to this truth. If it is really happening, all of this stuff, and it's being kept from the public, it is one of the greatest crimes committed against humanity, right? And that's why you have people like Christopher Mellon, David Grush, Lou Elizondo, um,
Mm-hmm.
Matt Gates, Marco Rubio, all these different people that have been exposed to this, that have said publicly,
Hmm.
we need to get this out in some fashion that brings us all up, but doesn't like destroy the foundation of society that we've created. Um, and look, uh, is it Mark Nell, the guy that recently spoke at the SALT conference?
Not sure.
You looking that up, Andre?
I'm looking that up right now.
Sorry, I've been talking for so long, I'm getting like a headache. But it's supposedly like David Grush's superior
Hmm.
at the time that the UAP task force was going on. Nell,
Yes, that's who he is. Yeah, he's his superior.
it was it Mark Nell?
It says Grush and Nels. Hold on. It says his last name. Carl Nell.
Carl Nell. Thank you. So much better. All right. So Carl Nell spoke at the SALT conference, and he spoke about the collapse of the Bronze Age and how we don't know why the collapse of the Bronze Age happened fully. One of the things that happened around the collapse of the Bronze Age was basically society had risen to its peak at the time. And for whatever reason, like all these disparate societies, their kingdoms were collapsing. Like the people were no longer following their monarchs and so on and so forth, right? It was a whole recorded time in history. One of the things that people have been bringing up on UFO Twitter was that there was apparently these sea people that showed up right around the same time. And they were super technologically advanced or what have you. Some people are translating that maybe these are like non-human intelligences that came from the sea and like destroyed these empires or whatever. Um, but it might not have been that. It might have just been the sheer fact that like mankind had run its course on this certain system and it just wasn't working anymore and people needed to see it collapse so that we could rebuild and start something better, right? Um, People are saying that maybe Carl Nell was trying to allude to the fact that we're kind of at that same precipice right now.
Mm-hmm.
We've got artificial intelligence entering the world en masse. Right now it's unregulated, or people are speaking out saying it should be regulated because they're worried about the dangers of it getting out of control. And maybe one of those dangers is that it could collapse society as we know it. And that's, what age are we in now? Are we in like the golden age, the silicon age? I don't know. But
Yeah.
the Bronze Age, he brought that up at the SALT conference and how all these things that are happening in mainstream society, it might be similar to a systemic collapse that might be coming in our time, right? And I hope it's not scary to live through that, but something tells me it's not going to be easy. And it might, maybe it's just fear mongering here. Maybe people are just reading too much into Carl Nell's words of wisdom, but and maybe society doesn't collapse at all.
Right.
Maybe it gets better. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. You never know.
The only thing that would alter that would be, the disclosure or the overall knowing presence of an extraterrestrial life, or for that matter, a separate terrestrial life that's been living under the ocean this entire time. That kind of revelation would change the course of history from day one. The scary part about it is that I think that you still would have factions of people that, in order to protect their own narrative of reality, that they would reject, may it be extraterrestrial or underwater terrestrial life. They would sort of reject it because it goes against what they consider reality, what their narrative is. And so that's another scary part about it, is that like you might have shock and awe, total acceptance, but then you'd have those branches of or factions of people that would reject it because human beings are only capable of processing so much.
Right.
And that's kind of the scary part
And I would say that's a natural reaction. I
to
think if
anything.
to anything that's different than the norm, I do feel that if any of these governments come out and say that there is life outside of Earth, they've been coming here for a long time, what have you, I feel that it would actually unite a lot of people together and form stronger beliefs
Absolutely.
in what they believe in. If you want to bring in faith, you can. It would bring potentially people closer to God and whichever God they believe in. So I think there's a little bit of both. You would have people that would freak out and lose sense of reality, and you have a lot of people that would actually come together more and
Yeah,
have a stronger belief.
I think it's happened throughout history that people reject the new
Hmm.
way of society, right? Like, I was just looking it up so I could speak to it a bit better. But look, like, there's all these people that are going crazy about like the gender spectrum that's being discussed, right? And that's
Right.
just like a new thing that's happening in our epoch of time. It's a new sort of evolution of human, I guess, social mechanisms. But if you go way back when we were like, living in caves and stuff, and we started moving out of caves and we started building towns, villages, and cities that were still surrounded by shelters, homes, and stuff. We kind of create our own artificial caves, but out of the wilderness, the people that stayed in those caves and kind of rejected that new colonial style of living were called troglodytes, right? And troglodytes, they like didn't survive. They kind of just that species of human just kind of like fell by the wayside. Maybe eventually they joined us out of the cave, but that's what that type of human was. And there's another type of human that got scared when they started seeing technology in the 19th century. They were called Luddites, right? Luddites resisted the increased industrial technologies, especially computers. And like, I was at a Jane Goodall lecture when I was living in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. Um, as people may note, she was like the woman that lived among the apes,
Hmm.
in Africa and the Congo and stuff. And she really was one of these early primatologists that went to that frontier to understand these, lesser evolved ape beings like us.
Mhm.
And there were people that were like standing up uh, in the Q&A, and they were screaming that we shouldn't be using technology, we should be going back, and they basically were modern day Luddites. And
Mm.
there's just certain ideas that will always challenge the masses, and there will be people that will kind of like embrace that. And when they do embrace it, the early adopters of certain technologies that are life changing or society changing, those can lead to greater progress for
Hmm.
society. But you're always going to have sometimes small groups, sometimes large groups that challenge um, this new paradigm. And
Yeah.
so I think what Carl Nell is talking about is like, we might witness that in our day and age where we get like a mass resistance to the idea that we're not alone in the universe. And it might challenge certain people so much that parts of society start collapsing. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. You never know.
But I mean, based on your newest film, Transmedium, Fast Movers and USOs, it sounds like there really is a backward engineering program that is out there, and that there are programs that are out there to sort of create these crafts that are able to move in ways that we've never seen before. Um, I guess the question is that where does this technology come from? And has anyone that you've talked to given you any insight on where this technology could have come from?
I mean, only from studying the discussions that have happened within the UFO community, you get answers like supposedly some crash craft are from extraterrestrial civilizations. Some are dimensional craft, like from another dimension that exists probably outside of our perception,
Mhm.
that may even exist somewhere here within somehow our plane, but without us understanding it. And then you've got like ancient retrievals, like Bob Lazar talks about how
Mhm.
they might have found a craft that was actually from an archaeological dig, right? And so that's where you say, well, okay, who was here before us that was more advanced than us,
Right.
right?
And you're
Um,
talking thousands of years ago
yeah,
already.
and that
Already.
that that could be the same people that were on the moon. You know,
Right.
we were discussing that before. I mean, it's not uh, against a possible scientific reality if we're being visited by a higher intelligence throughout time. Maybe they existed here before us, and now they're just watching this new science experiment before their eyes. You know?
Mhm.
With
What?
these
What?
like
Oh, go ahead. Yeah.
automaton beings doing their bidding as they are watching from a distance. You know, you have like the Tic Tac UFOs, and Fravor even said that he saw a larger one in the water, and so it's kind of like, okay, are these a separate species that's living under the water, or is this their base of operations and it was just transferring data from the small one to the bigger one? Who knows? It's an incredible thing about.
Yeah. Is there, because I've heard a lot about USOs off the coast of San Diego, California. Is there a hotbed of where there's more of these USOs being witnessed than anywhere in general?
I think there's evidence that these things have existed all throughout the Atlantic, all throughout the Black Sea, like the Arctic Circle, and the Pacific Ocean. Um, we're only just starting to, you know, make the connections now and figure out that there's a lot more going on in our oceans um, than we know about, right? And the folks that probably know the most are the navies of the world.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And Darcy, I want to thank you so much for coming on here and talking with us, especially talking about your new film, Transmediums, Fast Movers and USOs, which you can find on Amazon. It's a great documentary. Check that out as soon as you can. And a big shout out to Darcy, who actually used some of the footage for one of my videos in this movies, and I was actually credited as well. So I was like, yes. Actually, this is how it looked, but in my mind, it looked more like this. Lit, yes. So Darcy, I want to thank you so much for coming on here and talking with us, and obviously thank you for even considering the video that I made to even be a part of that. That meant the world to me, and so and really that in itself kept this channel going. So I was like, there's no way that Darcy's going to use anything from my channel, and I'm just not going to continue making content on this channel. And right now we're almost at 900 subscribers, and I want to say 4 weeks ago we were at 28. So
Yeah.
Wow.
it's been amazing. Yeah, it's been a
Yeah.
wild ride, but
Roller coaster.
Well, yeah, thanks for being an inspiration to the Shag Harbor incident. You know, um, I really appreciated you reaching out to me, and I obviously did a lot with some of your segment, like improve the graphics and the images and all that stuff. But
everything.
Yeah.
I actually recreated it, Andre. So,
but you inspired me, and I said
right.
I
Awesome.
shouldn't overlook this story. So that's
It's a
what
great
we
story.
should. That's what we should be doing, right? Like in this community, we shouldn't be like trying to kill or murder each other in terms of our own opinions on the subject. We should be inspiring each other and trying to lead each other to the best possible version of the truth, right? So thanks, Ben. Really appreciate it. Thanks
Thank
for
you,
having
Darcy.
me on.
That was awesome.
Nice
man.
to meet you, Dan. Yeah.
Nice to meet you, man.
Let's keep
Yeah.
in touch.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, and you have a good night.
Cool. You too.
If you have a story that you would like to share with us on our podcast, please reach out to us at beyondxunknown@gmail.com. Paranormal, unexplained, UFO, or Bigfoot, reach out to us and share your story.
Ready to generate more leads from your website, Google, and your social channels without having to spend money on ads? Our platform provides you with an easy-to-use communication stream that sucks in free leads from your website, Google, Facebook, and Instagram, enabling you to reply and convert them into customers from your computer or from our mobile app. We'll even turn your inbound calls into text message conversations, so you'll never miss another lead again. Once you've converted a satisfied customer, you can shoot them a Google review request with a click of a button, which will explode your positive reviews and increase your position in search engines. The system will also pull new reviews from Google and Facebook right into your conversation stream, where you can read and reply. Jumpstart your business by getting started today.